you guys. I've got a light on me because it's dark and rainy outside. It's perfect fall weather on a Saturday morning. But I also wanted to take this time to do a video because I had promised to do a review of the black-footed ferret problem-based learning from Shelagh Gallagher that I had purchased. So I've been dragging my feet on doing this video because while PBLs are very easy for me and I totally get them, they're difficult to explain, as evidenced by the bulk of the parent manual as opposed to what the kid gets, which is much smaller and more sparse. So let's start from the beginning. Okay, so let's start with PBLs are for anybody. These PBLs I think would be good for 5th grade to 12th grade. And in fact, what I want to do is buy all of Shelagh Gallagher's PBLs. There are at least 9, and do one a month with Morgan in her high school year as an actual 1-credit course titled Problem-Based Learning. Because it's that important to me, because that was my career working in this environment of an unknown, which is what PBLs are. You're thrown into a situation where you know very little about the problem, and your task is to figure it out. And a lot of people are really uncomfortable with that. So that's what you're doing with your kid. But the thing is, if you think about it, that's how we grow up. When we're really, really little, everything around us is nothing but a PBL. This is a PBL. Learning how to use the stairs is a PBL. Everything a child does as they learn and explore is problem-based learning. Cause and effect, studying, research. The stove is hot, don't touch it again. So stuff like that. But then what we do is we take that away from kids when they're young and we give them structured learning in a structured environment. And we don't come back to the idea of free thought and free form personal research, allowing a child to just learn how they want to learn, take certain things that are important to them and place them appropriately in their brain, attach all of the synapses to other things that they know about the world in their own way. And I would really argue that PBL is the way to allow a person to learn and keep that knowledge, because the way they investigate a problem is so personal. Every kid is going to go down different avenues of exploration. So no two are alike, I would think. Okay, so I've been avoiding doing this because it's kind of complicated, but actually really easy to do once you wrap your mind around it. So let's start with Ferret Ecology, and I've got my notes, I might refer to them. What you have is the black-footed ferret, which we all thought was extinct, and then it was discovered that it wasn't. So your kid is placed in the position of being a biologist whose job it is to assist the Fort Collins science researchers in rehabilitating the black-footed ferret and placing it back into the wild. All the while, as the child's learning, well, what is the black-footed ferret? Where does it live? How much does it weigh? What does it eat? What environment does it need to be in to thrive? And then what is the problem? Why is it so hard to reintegrate a ferret into the wild? Shouldn't you just let it go and it would be fine? Let the cage open and they'll be okay. But what the child learns is it's actually way more difficult to reintegrate a species that has been nearly lost in its environment. And there's so many things around that where the land has to be conducive to the ferret. Then its prey, what it eats, has to be available. You can't just dump 5 ferrets into 10 acres. They'll starve. They have to have an amount of land per each family. And so what you do is you allow the child to begin investigating. And it can start off really easy. Some kids can just take off super, super fast of, oh, I don't know, let's go figure it out. And so you can have books available, and there are printouts available in the book as well. Some of them don't work, and I wrote into Royal Fireworks Press because their links are old or are not managed by the originator anymore. But it's really easy to find your own, which is what I did. So there is a lot of front loading on the parents' part. This is not a curriculum that you can just open and go and run through it with your kid. For one, you're not involved, so you really do have to stay out of the way. You're around to assist and guide the child, but if you are in any way teaching, you're missing the point of a problem-based learning assignment for a child, and then you're just doing school. Then you're just teaching. You actually don't need a PBL if you're going to do it that way. But the idea is to be a coach, to come at it with, or to come back to the child each evening and say, okay, well, what did you learn? What do you need? What resources? Because part of it is letting the child figure out what they don't know, letting the child learn how to find their own resources. And if they're very young, Morgan is in the 5th grade. She's pretty young for this, but it doesn't mean she can't do it. She's just going to do it differently. And so we would come at it each night. She'd tell me what she learned, and I'd ask her questions, and oh, I don't know, what does that mean? And what's that like? And those would end up being her questions that she would want to answer the next day. And so that's where we went. So what I did was decide, I thought of ways to make it really realistic. And one was the memos to Morgan from the researcher saying, okay, here's the problem, and I know you can do it, and here are the things that I'd like you to do, because there are some tasks for the child initially, but they don't know any more than what they're given. You're not coaching them. What I did was I printed out the memo and then had my husband sign it in his handwriting, folded it up and stuck it in the mail. And so Morgan actually got snail mail, the memo. That's how the unit study began, was she got mail one day, and it was a memo showing what her role was. What I also had done, because I didn't really think that at Morgan's age I needed to go and find an expert for her to talk to, I decided instead to create a pseudo Gmail account in a fake name, and I created my own persona. So if Morgan had questions, she could email this person. And she is a field researcher. I made myself out to be a field researcher in Fort Collins. She got an email from this lady talking to her about, hey, I understand you're going to be on the team and you're working this and this and this issue. I'm a few weeks ahead of you. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and ask. So Morgan had that available, and it kind of lent to a more real world environment. So each day she could check to see if her new colleague or new friend had written her, and she could also, if she had a question for me that I didn't want to answer as a teacher, I could say, I don't know, maybe you should ask Minerva because she's available. So then Morgan could get online and ask a question. And then the interesting thing is she doesn't get an automatic response. Just like in the real world, you write an email and somebody isn't necessarily going to respond right away. But in the evening, I would write or point her in the right direction to either a YouTube video or a book or an article, or I'd attach an article, and then I'd send it in the evening, so then in the morning, Morgan could check her email and Minerva had written to her. I want to recap some of the things that I had in my first video about this, because it's so important, and it really reminded me as I was working through it with Morgan, notes I think that would help a homeschool mom. And that is that the child in this case really must have responsibility over their own learning. That is the point of the PBL, is for you not to teach the child, but for them to investigate the problem and learn themselves. And then the problems also have to be what they call ill-structured. And I would really call that open-ended or murky situations where the kid kind of knows the topic but doesn't know where they need to go or what they need to do. And so that's what's considered an ill-structured problem, or an open-ended issue, or a project that you're taking on and don't know the full details of. And the benefit of a PBL also is that the child, when they learn this way, they are, unbeknownst to them, really realizing it, they're integrating a whole bunch of different types of sciences or history or all different types of subjects, and investigating different ways to find solutions. I have to say that this was really the magical part of the PBL for me in watching my kid learn. I just let Morgan, she's in the 5th grade. This isn't a grade. It doesn't matter how long it takes her. What did I care? And this is the first one. So I really wanted to stay as far back from her as I possibly could and give her as much room to learn, so that I could see what it is that she could do or wanted to do or would do without me. And even I, as somebody who, I'm not a hovercraft mom, I really don't do that. I never have. I'm a product of the 70s. We were left on our own constantly to get along. So I really liked the idea of doing this with Morgan, but even I didn't realize how much a kid can learn without you when they're left alone. We frequently think that if we leave our kids alone, they'll, be a disaster or something. But I would say that there's a benefit to, if you have a child who can handle this type of thing, to do it more and more and as much as possible. Because I wasn't even certain exactly how much Morgan was learning until we were with a friend, and my friend was asking what Morgan was doing in homeschool. And the first thing Morgan said was she was working on a PBL. Oh, what's a PBL? Well, it's problem-based, where I have a problem that I need to solve. And right now I am a biologist who works for the Fort Collins Research Project, and I'm trying to figure out how to reintegrate the black-footed ferret into its environment. So like, wow, okay, yeah, she's got that. And so my friend thankfully asked her about more. What else and what else? And so Morgan started talking to her about the importance of biomes and keystone animals. And my jaw was dropping of exactly how much she had taken on for herself as her own information, how invested she was in this topic. Not because I had told her it was important, but because she had learned herself that it was important, using different resources, online resources, videos, books. It was just a shock to even me that even after a week and a half, how much Morgan had learned. So I really am not going to forget that. I really believe that for us at least, PBLs is a fantastic learning tool that I really want to capitalize on for many years to come. Now, these two that I have, I purchased specifically. They weren't my preferred necessarily, the plague and the ferret. I mean, they're all great, but I actually would have picked a couple others. But these two were the only two that stated they were for a single kid, because PBLs, by its definition, requires collaboration of a team. I would argue that that's stupid. You don't need to do that at all. So I'm actually going to buy all of them and use them only for Morgan Bid. Collaboration, yes, is important, but it doesn't mean that you need to have people work on it with you. Collaboration, you can change the description in your mind to that meaning you pulling many other resources and also reaching out to other people who may be able to help you but aren't part of that team. So for me, in my work, that is essentially what I was doing all of the time. I was alone frequently to figure out a problem, but I wasn't necessarily alone. I mean, it was mine to destroy or mine to do really well with, but I had the responsibility on my own to have other people, to bring other experts in to help me, and then say thank you, and then, fee for service, thank you, your job is done, and you're done. So you can do all of these PBLs in collaboration with other people without doing it as a team, as a group effort. You can have one child do this. So they do say that collaboration is essential, and I would argue that that's not the case. Oh, and another really good point is that whatever the child learns, their self-learning needs to go back to answering the problem. And what does this mean? It means it keeps your kid on track. And in the military, we call this mission creep, where if you investigate something, oh, well, that's important too, and that's important too, and that's important too. And then before you know it, you've done a week of research on really interesting topics, but you've gotten away from the original problem and you haven't spent enough time linking certain things back to the problem. So in this way, I would say that when you're doing a PBL with your kid, that's probably the main thing that you as the parent are going to want to keep track of mission creep, of the child should absolutely be allowed the freedom to explore anything they want around the topic. And they may get too far down a hole where they've completely changed topics. So you might want to make sure each evening that they stay on point. Now, if they have discovered other things that they're interested in, keep that in mind, because they can continue to research that either on their own or as their own unit study with you later. But keeping them on task to answer the problem is also paramount to anything. It's actually the number one problem that I had at work was mission creep of people. When I worked on projects with them, they would worry too much about the peripheral issues and not enough about the main problem. And it frequently was a topic of discussion of bringing everybody back to the table, refocusing their efforts, and then letting them back out to do whatever it was. I will warn you though, I will say that if staying out of the way of your kid is really hard for you, if you're that, what do they call, they're like lawnmower moms, the PBL is going to be hard for you and your kid. I mean, you can do it, but it'll end up just being teaching rather than a child exploring. So really, you need to take account of yourself and look inward and ask yourself, can I let my kid alone long enough so that they can learn on their own? And if the answer is no, then maybe you're not ready for a PBL. Okay, so the takeaways that I had myself was that anybody can do a PBL style of learning, especially kids. If you want to do something like this, 5th grade on, I think any earlier, you're kind of going to miss a lot of the book. I also think that the older you get, the quicker and more detailed you can be, and the more information you can take on and the more you can read. I didn't want to burn her out on this. These are so important that I wanted to make sure it stayed fun. And then before it got slow or kind of she felt like she was bogged down, just as she felt like she was done, we stopped it. So for us, I would say I had planned this to take 2 weeks and it took twice as long. So I'm going to think about that and consider how I want to address the plague PBL and how long I want to take and how much I expect. Because at this point, since it's ungraded and she's learning a ton, but not necessarily going through the entire process of the PBL, I think that's good for now. So that's my takeaway is if you do this at a young age, don't push it. Do as much as they're interested in doing, and that's good enough. Another thing that I noticed was Morgan was still, and this might have had to do with age and will likely go away, and it might have something to do with structure of school, and how as we go more and more into homeschool and I have Morgan be more independent and more have more of a say over where she's going to go with her learning, this may shed its skin. But I did notice that Morgan was often waiting for me to guide her, waiting for the teacher cues, waiting for the assignment. And when it didn't come, that was where the PBL really kicked in. That was the problem for my kid was, oh, she's not going to tell me what to do. She's not going to tell me what book to open or where to go or what to look for online. And so when she was a little bit confused, that was where she fell back on her questions from discussion the evening before. She would literally disappear and she'd come back 30 minutes later with some more information on the black-footed ferret and the problem that she was investigating. Another point that I hadn't seen coming was Morgan's way of learning, although we're very similar, is very different from mine also. And being able to move away and step back from my kid allowed her to fully be immersed in only her style of learning. And that was like magic. That was really the catalyst that got information in her head, continued to allow her to be curious about the subject rather than just being told she should be curious about the subject. I hadn't really seen that coming. I hadn't considered it before, but that was a benefit of stepping back to allow Morgan to be completely immersed in anything that she wanted to be in any way that she wanted to learn at any time of the day. And that was really amazing. So I'm not going to forget that. I'm going to bank on that later and use that in other subjects. Okay, so there are things that we didn't do. There's some kickers. They call them kickers, and I call it throwing a wrench in the works. But I don't feel like Morgan in the 5th grade needed any kickers. And there are things where your child investigates to a certain point and gives you information, and then you throw in a detail that will cause her to question whether or not her information is now true still based off of the new information. And I meant to get to it, but as the time was going by, I was enjoying watching Morgan learn freely on her own, and I just didn't feel at this stage that they were necessary. So we didn't do those, but they are available. All right, things we did add though. I created a biologist as myself in a Gmail account. So I did that, and that worked really well. We can do that again. I snail mailed the memos from her boss, from her supervisor. And I also added the Broken Circle, and we read this, and it was so good. This is about the black-footed ferret and their trouble, but it's from the ferret's point of view. And I would say, I mean, this book pairs so well with the PBL. It's just wonderful. In fact, I wrote Royal Fireworks Press and asked if they would consider, when they revamp Some of their sources for information are not accurate in here anymore, and I wrote them in and asked them to add in Bill Rudd's Broken Circle. Bill Rudd and Ron Lockwood. One is no longer living, but both are biologists who worked on these problems, and it's an adorable story. It'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry. It's wonderful. So I added that in, as that probably wouldn't be considered really keeping true to a PBL, because everything about the PBL needs to be real, and this is, you know, I mean, it's from a ferret's perspective, but I don't see that as a problem at all. I think what this did was it backed up what Morgan, so what she would do was she'd research some, and then I'd read a chapter, and she would say, oh, well, that's like so-and-so, or that's like what I had just learned, and that's not quite accurate, or do you think that's true? So it was really kind of neat. And what we also did was, because we're testing out Waldorf style learning and using live education, there's a main lesson book, and our main lesson book is a giant watercolor book. And I had decided that it would be really good to integrate a whole page, a main lesson, to write down what Morgan's work was, so that she can remember what she did. And what I had done was had her narrate. So she's getting really good at narrating for me, and she can speak far more than she can write with her little hands. And so I realized very quickly that if she explains something to me while I'm typing super, super fast, it really does come out in Morgan's own voice. And then what I do is I print it out, and then she uses that as her write-up. Because if she was just to write it straight from her mind onto the page, kids get exhausted that way, and this is quite a lot to write. So I'll flip you around and show you what she had done in her own voice, and it was quite a lot. So it takes a couple of days to actually write it once she's narrated it. And I find that narration done by the child while the parent's writing, or at least in our case, there's so much more detail in that. And it's not a writing test. So it's really about the knowledge that she has. And I really wanted to document it so that she would know throughout the time, she can look back on this book of all of the work that she has done, and that she can remember it. So now I'll flip you around and I'll show you the books. I won't do a full flip through of the PBL, but I'll walk you through a few of the things that were important to me, and also our main lesson page. I should have also mentioned that we started out the black-footed ferret after Morgan got her first memo in snail mail with a full-length documentary about another animal that needed to be reintegrated into its environment, and that was the wolf. Bill Pullman hosts on the Smithsonian Channel a full-length documentary on reintegration of predators, and it is absolutely stunning. And it's really cool because it talks about a lot of the problems that Morgan's going to need to learn about regarding the black-footed ferret without talking about the black-footed ferret. So I think that, especially with younger kids, if you're moving into a PBL that they don't know anything about, what a great way to start by bringing in some other kind of similar problem and then launching them into their own PBL. Okay, so here is the problem-based learning in your homeschool by Shelagh Gallagher. And this is a really quick and easy read. So if you're curious about what PBLs are, how to do one, what they're for, in fact, once you read this, you could create your own. So I found this helpful, but you can get a lot of free information on PBLs online easily if you don't want to spend the money. Here is the parent manual, which is really heavy duty. Let's start from the beginning. Okay, so here's the table of contents. There really is a lot. And what it does is it first talks you through the idea of what a PBL is and how the ferret ecology plays into that, how it will be used as a PBL. This is really helpful too, because there is a lot for you to wrap your mind around before you unleash this onto your kid and let them run with it. And then there's lessons, the idea of if you wanted to do this in a more formal environment, or if you did have a group of kids, or if you had a co-op that you were going to do this with, then this would become more and more important to have lesson plans and an idea of certain projects that each of the students would do throughout that day. And this helps you coordinate that. I needed it for my own knowledge, but I didn't have to use this with Morgan necessarily for as a playbook play-by-play. And then here is the kickers. So if you wanted to throw a wrench in the works and the kids or your kid had done research in something, and then you can integrate more information and say, oh, well, and now here's a memo on this, and it makes them rethink their research. The ill-structured problem, you really are having your hand held here. A lot of the things that I had mentioned are in here, and it walks you through essentially the idea of coaching vice teaching and how you can instruct your child without them knowing that that's what you're doing. Here is the problem log, and this talks about what your child will be using. This is the problem log. And here is an explanation of why it's important and what they need to do. But very quickly, Morgan went away from this. She used it, but then she preferred her visually, her writing style is different, the way she thinks. And so she used this, but didn't write so much in it. And instead, she took notes and placed it in her personal file. So I won't show you her personal notes, but some of the things that she had in here were, here is the first memo that Morgan had mailed to her. We talked about highlighting important things, and she had read the memo a couple of times and went through some of the things that she knew that she needed to do or things that she didn't understand. And so this was a great launching point. The idea of having a memo is just really great. And then these are the news articles that the PBL gives you so that your child can, as if this is a newspaper that's given to them or comes in the mail, they can read about this. Some information is important and some isn't. Some seems like it's not important. But if the child reads everything throughout their studies, they might go, oh, wait a minute. So for instance, Morgan didn't realize that ranchers and prairie dogs have a contentious relationship, and that cattle can play a role in the loss of prairie dog count or population, leading to the near extinction of the black-footed ferret or their inability to feed. And so that's not readily apparent here, but when they read through it, when it does in another subject or another line of investigation triggers their memory, they'll go, oh, but wait, I read that in the newspaper, and then they can go back, and now this information becomes important. So this stayed kind of on and off the table throughout the weeks that Morgan was learning, and she used it some days and she didn't on other days. So that was the problem log, and she essentially kind of went off script in that regard and did her own research, and that's fine. But here is kind of nice because this helps you structure the schedule if you want to do, there's chart A and chart B. We ended up doing a much more detailed extended schedule. This is the important part for the parent. I highlight it a lot because there's a ton of information. Essentially, you learn everything that the child is going to learn, and then you use that to sort of coach, not teach. So you have to know the whole problem and all of the answers and everything before you give it to your kid, so that if you need to coach them and help guide them in a certain area, you already have the background knowledge to be able to do that. Now, one thing about internet resources, the book is laid out kind of funny because when they talk about resources, they're not on that page or anywhere near it. They're several pages later. So you really have to read deeply and make sure, okay, well, the resources aren't here in this chapter. They're way back somewhere else, but they are not up to date. So it doesn't matter. It's really easy to find new resources. And in fact, I think the problem with giving URLs or other people's websites, the problem with that is it really dates the text. And it really does lend itself to a high risk of those resources no longer being available to the person who's purchased the book. It's not a game changer at all. And in fact, it's not necessary. It should just say use internet resources, and you and your kid should be able to figure that out. Here is the problem engagement rubric, kind of like expectations of quality of work, and does the child participate? And this would be for a larger group or a more formal setting. It's just not something that Morgan and I needed, but I did have Morgan look through it as kind of an introspective idea of how am I doing, what is my standard or level of work, and do I want it to be better than it is, or am I satisfied with it? These are the lesson plans, and it walks you through step by step of where you're going to begin and how. Here on page 24 is where it starts. The summary, your child receives the memo. The memo arrives, and also the Coloradoan, the newspaper, near somewhere in your house that they can find and grab. And then this is essentially the memo that I printed out and mailed. And then I just photocopied this. Oh, okay. So the learning issues board, we did in a different way, and this was through narration every night. I didn't use this page other than to inform me what I needed to talk to Morgan about. So what does Morgan already know? What problems is she having, or where does she want to go? And then her plan of action, her preferred plan of action was to write the question down that she didn't know an answer to, and then the next day use that as her launch into the research that day. So that's how we use the learning issues board. And then this is kind of a sample of what you could fill out, but I didn't think this was necessary. You might want to do it if you're being more formal about it. And the rest is essentially lesson by lesson, things that you want to think about or do with your child. And it's very similar. And this is a copy essentially of Morgan's problem log. The problem log also does have interesting things that she might want to think about, like the different kinds of ecosystems and what a biome is. Morgan didn't know what a biome was, and now she can speak very well about them. In fact, I was really, really impressed. So it was kind of cool. She didn't even read this whole thing. She saw this map and saw that there were biomes, and then went and did her own research and paired the right biome with the black-footed ferret, and identified that yes, Colorado or Fort Collins is a fantastic place to begin reintegrating the black-footed ferret. So it's kind of funny to see that some kids may read and devour this whole thing, and then mine read like this part here and then just took off and did her own research. So it's really kind of cool. You can see where she had started, and then she sort of got just sidetracked or distracted by her own research. And that's when the narration each evening became more and more important, because she wasn't documenting it until she was talking to me, and that's how we document. And then this essentially is identical to her problem log, but I essentially just used hers if she wanted to pull hers out. And then there's ferret math, which is really cool. I wasn't sure if Morgan would be interested in doing ferret math and determining how much land does one ferret need, or one ferret family of, I think, 4 to 6 ferrets. How much land do they need? That also coincides with how many prairie dogs can live off of that same amount of land, because ferrets predominantly eat prairie dogs. So if you, for instance, put one ferret into a 6-acre piece of property with 50 prairie dogs, a problem will soon ensue. The black-footed ferret will eat all the prairie dogs and then starve to death, or have to leave and find another home. So I was surprised at how much she wanted to do that, and how interesting it was for us to work out ferret math of how many prairie dogs and how many ferrets can live on a piece of land. So this is kind of gives you an idea of the book. And then what I did was I added the broken circle. As I was doing research for Morgan before we started this, I happened upon this and I thought, oh, well, this would be kind of cool. And then when I realized it's by 2 biologists who worked for the state of Wyoming and really do know about this. So what they did was they took the facts about the black-footed ferret and made a lovely story about it. Just wonderful. It's super easy to read. I would say this was probably, because of the length, it's 5th grade level, but the language-wise, a 4th grader or a ambitious 3rd grader could read it. But the length, it's quite lengthy. And so what I did was I read it to Morgan, and it tells just a wonderful story about Little Star, the black-footed ferret, who is essentially the one who finally is reintegrated back into his environment. And that's the beginning of the research project and the rehabilitation project. It's the beginning of success for the ferrets. So I thought this cover was so nice that I decided, well, we should do a main lesson on this Waldorf style by taking this art and bringing it into our main lesson book, and then writing up in Morgan's own words all of the research, or as much of the research as she wanted to write down that she had done. So from here, let me see if I can fit this in. We took the book and spent a day or two painting it. And then Morgan narrated this entire thing, and I typed it up. And then once it was typed up, I printed it out for her, and I wrote this down to make sure it fit first. and it's a good squeeze. And then so Morgan took her artwork and then used her own narration to write her own work. So that's a really great way, I think, to document all of the work that she did and her research and the time and trouble that she took to learn about this poor little guy. And we're really rooting for him now. So when we go to Colorado, I'm going to take Morgan to Fort Collins, and we can actually go and see a black-footed ferret, make a donation, and I don't know, support them, because it's just such a, it's a sad and but also really hopeful story. And that's how we did it. So that's it. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. PBLs are very important here, if you can't tell. I'm more than enthusiastic about them. I am convinced that this is a really, really great way for any of us to learn, and for us to allow our children to learn freely, to place the information in their minds where they need to place the information so that it is retained in their memory and is attached to other things appropriately. And it's just great to see kids learn like this. Yeah, we're gonna be doing this for a while. All right, thanks for watching, you guys. See you later.